More than a year into Russia's war on Ukraine and 8 months, the so-called Green Deal has been operating. And was it a success or failure for Ukraine and the world? How significant it is and why Ukraine wants to prolong it, while Russia claims the opposite. Hello and welcome, this is the Solutions from Ukraine podcast, which is brought to you by the Rubryka media outlet. My name is Vladyslav Faraponov, I am the co-host of this podcast and also an analyst at Internews-Ukraine, a Ukrainian media NGO. I am happy to be joined by my colleague Anastasia Rudenko, who is editor-in-chief of the independent all-Ukrainian Rubryka media outlet. And before we start, let me remind you that you can support us at Patreon, at patreon.com/Rubryka. So hello Nastya.
Hello.
And welcome to our podcast. So the reason we are making this episode now is that the grain deal that we'll talk about today expires exactly today on March 18th.
When we are recording our podcast.
Yeah.
As for now, Russia claimed that it would support the prolongation of the deal only for 60 days, which is really not a large amount of time, of course. And Ukraine, the United Nations, Turkey advocate for 120 days at least. And before that, Ukraine wanted to prolong it for a year. So before the war started in 2022, Ukraine was one of the world's top agricultural producers and exporters and played a critical role in supplying oilseeds and grains to the global market. Vlad, what do we know so far about the significance of the issue?
So, it is really important to understand that more than 55% of Ukraine's land area is land for agricultural products. And agriculture really provides employment for approximately at least 15% of Ukraine's population. And agricultural products are Ukraine's most important exports. And for example, if we see the statistics from the year of 2021, they totaled almost $28 billion. So it is about 40% of the country's overall export. So like almost half of Ukraine's export basically was dedicated to agricultural products before Russia launched the full-scale invasion.
And how does the war change Ukraine's grain export?
First, we have to understand that Russia wanted to seize all Ukrainian ports at the Black Sea region. So there are 3 ports in Odessa region, 2 in Mykolaiv, and basically those are like the major ones. And also there is one in Kherson. And before the war, all of these ports were operating quite well and successfly, but like it was not safe basically either to transfer grain to those ports after Russia launched war, and leaving those ports were also not safe for any ship. It doesn't matter if it is a Ukrainian one or international one, as Russian military ships control the Black Sea region. And in that context, we should also keep in mind the occupation of Crimea in 2014, and also like we should remember that only the liberation of the so-called Snake Island that was captured by Russians in early days of the war, it allowed basically to arrange this particular grain deal and to operate it successfully. So this grain deal, as we call it is a kind of exception. So it really looks like a corridor for ships that like is designed for civilian ships to pass by and transfer their goods. Like mainly it is grain, oil, but there are some other goods too.
Yes, and look, it is very important that Russia and Ukraine haven't signed a bilateral treaty. because Russia won't live by it, and on the very first day when the deal was set to begin, Russia launched missiles at Odessa port. So, Vlad, please tell us more about this deal and why it is so important for the entire world.
Yeah. So this corridor, as we call it, the Black Sea grain corridor, it remains, I would say, the only agreement that, despite bitter fighting, the Russian and Ukrainian sides basically managed to keep open, but technically, as you have mentioned, basically Ukraine and Russia have not signed a treaty, so the UN organized a treaty with Russia and Turkey, and the same with Ukraine. I would say it was also important for for Ukraine, because I would say that some Ukrainian officials probably expected something like that Russia did, on the very first day of this initiative, attacking by missiles the port of Odessa, basically one of the largest ports in Ukraine. And we should also understand that if this agreement is at risk of being suspended, we can definitely say that grave potential consequences for the entire global security will come after it. It was really important for the United Nations to arrange this actual patronage of the deal, because for the entire world, in my view, it sent a signal that we can talk to Russia. But as we see now about the talks of the prolongation of the treaty, everything is not so easy, and we'll discuss later basically why just not the only case of possible prolongation is is an important issue.
Yeah, and the first stage of the deal was meant to last for 120 days, which was later renewed on November 17th for the same period. This means the agreement now expires on March 18th, exactly on the day when we are making this podcast today.
Yes, so basically Ukraine's officials have kept this door open to extend that period for another year, but in my view it was unlikely that Russia will and would agree to such a proposal now, so that Putin in some way can maintain an ace up his sleeve. This deal was really essential and effective because during this period Ukraine has so far exported nearly 25 million tons of corn, wheat, according to the United Nations. The top destinations for shipments have been China, Italy, Spain, Turkey, and some other European countries. And it is interesting that Russia has been claiming that Ukraine was meant to export food to Africa and other countries in other regions that are in need. But it is important to mention that this basically UN-created Center for Coordination, it does not track the final destination of the ship. So we really don't know basically whether those cargoes can end up, and it is just another example of basically how baseless those claims of Russia are. And it is also important that this center, so the key mechanism of this deal is that the UN is a mediator, and it requires some inspections of the ships.
But what kind of inspections?
I cannot say for sure, but as I understand, they meant to prove that those vessels do not contain any weapons and explosions. So in simple terms, like it means that they are trying to prove that it is just a civilian vessel, basically not containing any dangerous stuff.
Because the so-called Black Sea Fleet of Russia is still in Crimea and in the Black Sea in general.
Yes, and it is also important to understand that despite the official maintenance of this deal, like Russia has been trying to delay those inspections, and of course, like obviously it leads to the delay of actual shipment of grain and others. So it is one of the mechanisms that Russia is trying to accuse Ukraine of delaying, but basically sabotaging these inspections.
Yeah. So Ukraine argues that Russia is reducing the number of inspectors involved. Ukraine's officials have been calling to speed up those inspections because the losses from such delays severely impact its export revenue. The reduced capacity Black Sea Corridor agreement allows Ukraine to export only 30% of all grain that could potentially be shipped. It's very low.
Yeah, absolutely. And another problem with this deal is that it covers only 3 Ukrainian ports. They are Odessa, they are Chernomorsk, and Pivdennyi. For example, I've been to basically all of these cities, and really, like, even when you just stare at the sea, usually there have been a lot of ships that are waiting to enter the port and leave it then. And so these are really important and large ports in Ukraine, but the problem is that they are all located in the Odessa region. And one way to solve this issue is to include additional ports in this initiative, and Ukraine has been advocating for that.
That's why Ukraine would like to change the current status quo and include 2 or at least one of its ports in neighboring Odessa, Mykolaiv region.
Yes, so there are several ports in my home region of Mykolaiv. Basically, one of them is private and one is owned by state. But there is also another more important problem in that regard. Basically, Russia occupied the Kinburt Spit. It is a small peninsula in the Black Sea close to the city of Очаков. It still remains the only part of the Mykolaiv region under Russian control.
Do I understand correctly that in order to pass through to Odessa or directly to Bosphorus, any ship would need to pass through this tiny passageway where the Ukrainian military cannot guarantee its safety?
Absolutely. So the major issue with the Kinburt Spit is that like it is really tiny, and it is hard for the Ukrainian army to push Russians back from it, but still they can basically like move closer to the sea and attack the city of Очаков. It's only basically 5 kilometers by land, or basically by sea, and like for example, I remember actually being in Очаков and staring at this spit, so it's really not a long distance. So the damage to the current status quo, I mean generally of this situation is really enormous. For example, according to Andriy Vodotursky, Mykolaiv's premier agricultural company Nibelon, and Andriy is the current CEO of the company after Russia killed his father, actually one of the most famous basically Ukrainian agricultures. So and this company, like it was established in three cities, in Mykolaiv, in Budapest, and in London. And this company already lost around 90% of its export capacity, as the usual route of their export was through the ports of Mykolaiv. And for now, the city has no free and safe path to serve those trade purposes. So adding at least one of the ports in Mykolaiv is really crucial for the industry. It really suffered tremendous losses from the loss of receiving credit lines from abroad due to Russia's stealing grain and other issues. But in that sense, basically one way is to negotiate safe passage with Russians. But I would say this option is really a rare one, because we see how Russia cannot abide those deals that it agreed to safeguard. So it's really a complicated issue, because for Ukraine side it leaves more questions than answers, and it will in some way require direct contact between Kyiv and Moscow, and any negotiation in that regard is a non-starter for Ukraine after Putin proclaimed that 4 regions of Ukraine are annexed to Russia. And so Ukraine has no other option than basically military to push Russians back from this peninsula. And this peninsula, it also has a land connection with the Kherson region. So basically, liberation of this peninsula, it's really tiny. In some region, in some part of it, it's only basically several meters before the sea, and so again, the liberation of this speed will at least start the liberation of the whole Kherson region, which Ukraine started to make in November last year.
Let's talk more about solutions. What Ukraine did, Ukraine's parliament in particular, is that one of the main amendments to the state budget is increasing the insurance of vessels participating in the grain corridor in the amount of up to more than $500 million. It's important. So while Russia is trying to sabotage the deal, Ukraine is not only interested in this agricultural export being preserved, but does some actions too, because it is both income to the state budget and jobs for people. If the Russian Federation creates risks of destroying ships operating under this agreement, the government of Ukraine will guarantee financial compensation to the owners and operators of such ships.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for a long-term strategy, and it is really a solution, because Putin has shown his willingness to hold the world food supply basically hostage to succeed in his adventures in Ukraine. Those ambitions would have succeeded if Russia had managed to get past Kherson in early March last year to Mykolaiv and then to Odessa, but Ukrainian armed forces and ordinary people also. I recall, for example, a video actually posted by head of the Mykolaiv military administration that from the way of Kherson to Mykolaiv, ordinary people were trying to stop Russian tanks. And we should keep in mind that all of these talks about the prolongation of the deal were impossible if ordinary Ukrainians did not stood up against Russian aggression more than a year ago.
So we have downsized Russian aspirations
Absolutely,
since
yes.
last year. So we are right to assume that adding Mykolaiev's port to the grain deal would also account for a new reality that acknowledges Ukraine's successful counteroffensive in the Kherson region.
Yes, and as we talked before, the Khyber Spit is a unique geographic location with the sea connection with the Charkiv and Mykolaiv region, and land connection with other parts of the Kherson region, which still remains under Russian control. So the liberation of those parts in Kherson lands through the Khyber Spit is the fastest way for Ukraine's army to re-establish its control of the waterway. So it's really the best and safest solution for Ukraine, and substantially for the entire world too. And recently, basically one of the most famous actual generals of Ukraine's army, Dmytro Marchenko, who was in charge of the battle that kept Mykolaiv under Ukraine's flag, said that it is extremely difficult for Ukraine's armed forces to catch Russians at the Khyber Spit. So it would be wise to assume that long-range missiles for Ukraine are needed to force the Russian quit the peninsula. It is also important for a long-term strategy for Ukraine as well, because geographically, it will also be a first step to push Russians back, and a step toward liberating Crimea also from Russian occupation. And it is crucial for Ukraine's vision of victory and ultimately the end of this war.
While we are making this episode, we reaffirm that still Ukraine has a lot more allies than Russia, and only Ukraine's victory can really pave the way to ensure global food supply operates well.
Yes, so stay with us, and also support us at Patreon at patreon.com/Rubryka. It will help us produce more independent podcasting and reporting, which will result in more help for Ukraine to win this hard but important war.